Minnesota, early December, just below freezing. I'm Delaney, I'm 39, and this story starts in a dining room filled with noise, but not much warmth. My family's always been loud laughter, storytelling, performances of closeness. I thought I knew how to blend in, until this year. Until the moment my dad said, in front of everyone, I'm proud of all my children, except the loser. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I left my plate full, my coat hanging, my place in the story, untouched. Have you ever felt like the quiet one in the family no one truly sees? I'd love to hear your story too. I told myself it would be fine, that I could go, stay for an hour, smile when I needed to, and leave before anything cracked open. I parked farther away than I needed to, an old habit I never really questioned, the kind that gives you a little walk before things get loud. The cold bit at my fingertips as I crossed the gravel lot. I'd brought a pie I didn't bake, and wore a sweater that used to belong to my mother. It still smelled faintly like her laundry detergent, even after all this time. Inside, the warmth hit first, not from the people, but from the air. The electric kind, slightly too hot, trying too hard to feel like comfort. Laughter was already bouncing off the walls when I stepped in. A cousin called someone's name. Plates clinked. Someone shouted, "The green beans are on the second table!" Saw like it mattered. I smiled. Not because I felt like it, but because I'd practiced that expression in the mirror before leaving. Just in case. The room was decorated in the usual way. Strands of fake pine wrapped around the windows, battery-powered candles flickering along the buffet. The kind of festive that doesn't mean much. Just enough effort to look like we're all trying. And then I saw the table. The big one. It was rectangular, like always, filled with the same faces. Slightly older now. My older brother, of course, already seated at the head, talking too loud about a promotion. My younger sister's kids were painting cookies on paper plates. My aunt and uncle had staked out the middle, laughing politely, wine already in hand. I scanned for a place to sit. Most of the chairs were taken. The rest had coats tossed over them or purses claiming space. One chair sat slightly off to the side, at the corner where the table began to curve toward the wall. Not quite included, not quite apart. Just there. I moved toward it, pie still in my hands, the smile tightening. No one looked up. Not when I walked past. Not when I slid the chair closer to the table. Not even when it scraped a little too loud against the floor. I nodded quietly, placed the pie where the desserts were collecting, and took my seat. It was fine. It was always fine. Aunt Roberta leaned over to compliment someone's earrings. My sister handed out little napkins with snowmen on them. Someone asked about the weather. It all sounded like static. Cheerful, contained, distant. I folded my hands in my lap. The light above the table flickered once, then steadied. It was a small chandelier, the kind that rattled when people walked too hard across old floors. I remember thinking it looked delicate, like it was trying to hold itself together. I felt a lot like that light. Someone passed around the first plate of ham. I declined politely, said I was pacing myself. No one asked a follow-up. My brother made a joke about protein and gains. My sister rolled her eyes. The cousins laughed. It was loud in the way families get when they're trying to stay surface level. No tension yet, just a performance of closeness. I knew the rhythm by heart. You show up, you smile, you shrink yourself small enough to not cause anything. I glanced across the table and caught my niece watching me. The youngest one. She gave me a tiny wave. I waved back. She looked relieved, like she'd gotten something right. That was the first soft twist, I think. The first small thing that didn't ache. But it passed. As the food made its rounds, the conversations splintered. College updates, real estate drama, a story about someone's neighbor's dog. I nodded where I was supposed to. I sipped water. I counted the number of times my name hadn't been said. 3, 5, 7. I noticed my pie was still untouched. No one had taken a slice. That felt like something. Not a tragedy, not a rejection, just a confirmation. I hadn't been planned for. Not really. Across the table, my brother mentioned a ski trip. My father laughed and patted his shoulder. "That's my boy," he said, in that too loud way he uses when he wants everyone to hear. My sister chimed in with a joke. He laughed again, called her sharp as ever. I waited. For what? I'm not sure. The chair beneath me felt a little wobbly, one leg shorter than the others. I shifted slightly. No one noticed. And then I realized what was missing. My name. Not just today, but in so many of these rooms, for so many years. I was there, always technically invited, but rarely named, rarely folded into the narrative, just outside the edge of things. That was the second twist. It wasn't that I didn't belong. It was that no one ever made room for me to. Still, I stayed. I always stayed. Because part of me believed maybe this year would be different. That someone would pull out the chair and say, "This one's for you." But they didn't. And I pulled it in myself. Later, I would think about that moment a lot. The scraping sound, the way no one flinched, the exact tone of the light above the table, the fact that the pie remained whole, even after the meal. But for now, I just sat there, palms resting still, eyes moving slowly across the table. The warmth of the room pressing in like a weighted blanket you're not sure how to take off. I told myself I was fine, and I almost believed it. The moment didn't announce itself. It didn't come with thunder or glass breaking. It just arrived. Mid-conversation, mid-chew, mid-nothing. I had been looking at the napkin in my lap, tracing the outline of a cartoon snowflake with my thumb, the kind of mindless motion that keeps your hands from shaking. Across the table, my father was laughing too hard at something my brother had said, something about deadlines and leadership and real responsibility, the kind of thing that makes sense in their world. I wasn't really listening, not until the volume of his voice cut sharper than it had before. "I'm proud of all my children." And then he paused. I thought it was for effect, maybe to take a bite, maybe to laugh again. But he didn't. He looked up, caught someone's eye, and finished it. Louder this time. "Except the loser." That word, loser. It landed like a plate dropped too close to your feet. Not on you, not touching you, but loud enough to make your body flinch. No one said anything, not at first. The sentence just sat there, right in the middle of the green bean casserole and cranberry sauce and gravy boat. I waited for the punchline, for someone to laugh it off or say he was joking or nudge me under the table and whisper, "Don't mind him." But nothing came. My brother kept eating. My sister sipped her wine. My aunt adjusted her scarf. Only my niece looked at me. Just for a second. Then away. The air changed, thicker, still warm, but tighter now. Like the room had lost its shape and become a hallway with no doors. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. I sat there, still like I'd forgotten how to move. Some part of me wanted to believe I misheard him, that he said later or lawyer or something, anything else. But no one corrected him, and silence is louder than words. I felt the blood in my face start to drop, like it was draining downward, into my chest, into my legs, into the floor. He had said it before in other ways, with sighs, with silence, with the way he introduced my siblings and avoided introducing me. But this was different. This was for everyone to hear. And I think that was the part I wasn't ready for. I looked at my plate. Full. Untouched. Again. The ham. The roll. The green beans I didn't want. All sitting there like offerings to a conversation that didn't include me. I thought about standing up. Then I thought about disappearing instead. Neither felt possible. My hands were suddenly too visible. I didn't know where to place them. The napkin was crumpled now. I flattened it, then folded it once, then again. The light above the table buzzed. A flicker. The kind I might have missed if I weren't staring into nothing. In the corner of my vision, my father went back to eating. Like he hadn't said anything. Like it was just a line in a movie. A cousin whispered something. Someone cleared their throat. Still, no one looked at me. And that was the second betrayal. The first was the sentence. The second was the silence that followed. I remember thinking, if I don't leave now, I won't remember how to. My legs were already shifting before my mind had caught up. Chair scraping backward, one hand on the edge of the table for balance, the other clutching the napkin like it might keep me from falling apart. No one stopped me. I walked, not fast, but not slow. Just enough to feel like I wasn't running, even though every part of me wanted to sprint. Through the hallway, past the coat rack, down the steps into the cold. The sky had shifted while we were inside. Thick gray clouds, the kind that don't storm. They just sit there and hold weight. I didn't cry. Not yet. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. It was something else. Something more hollow. Shock, maybe. Or that old, quiet grief you think you've buried, only to find it was sitting at the edge of your breath all along. I leaned against my car. The handle felt cold. For a second, I thought about going back in. Just to grab my coat. Just to say goodbye. Just to pretend like it didn't matter. But I didn't. Because it did. Because he said it. And no one disagreed. And in that silence, they all told me exactly where I stood. Outside. There's a kind of silence that doesn't wait for you to fill it. It just becomes the air. That's what followed me out of the room. Not footsteps, not apologies. Just the sound of my own shoes brushing against old floorboards and the hum of a hallway that had nothing to say to me. I didn't rush. It felt important not to rush. Like if I moved too fast, it would turn into something dramatic. Like I'd give them a story to tell later. She stormed out. I didn't storm. I walked, back straight, hands at my sides, a napkin still in one fist, crumpled like a soft kind of anchor. The cold outside met me like it knew I needed it. Not biting, not brutal, just cool enough to remind me I had a body again. I leaned against my car. The metal had held the December air. It pressed through my sweater and settled along my spine. I didn't unlock the door. Not yet. Instead, I stared out across the gravel lot, watching the flicker of porch lights on cabins down the hill. One of them had wind chimes that caught the breeze. The notes were thin and lonely. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 3 minutes, maybe 20. Inside, the world kept turning. Ham being passed, wine being poured, my chair, probably still slightly pulled away from the table where I'd tried to belong, and my plate, still full. That was the detail that kept returning. More than the sentence even. More than the sharp weight of that word. Loser. It was the plate. The way I had served myself like everyone else. Tried to fill space. Tried to match what I thought was expected. And then left it all behind. A quiet refusal. Not loud, not brave, but mine. No one followed me. That part, I think, I already knew. Even as I walked, I knew. I knew no one would stand up. No one would come outside. No one would offer me a coat or a question or a goddamn, why did he say that? And still, part of me waited. I watched the door, half expecting it to open, half hoping I'd hear my name said kindly for once. It didn't open. I heard laughter again, muted now, behind walls. That was the second twist of the night. Not just that my father said it, but that everyone else let him. And I let me leave. The sky above me had turned to a kind of steel blue. Not quite night, but headed there. Clouds thick enough to erase stars before they could show up. I opened the car door. The fabric seat was cold, too. I sat slowly, like my body had become heavier. I didn't drive yet, just sat. Hands in my lap. The pie I brought was still inside. On the dessert table, unopened. Another full plate. Another gesture left untouched. I thought about going back for it. For the coat I left hanging. For the part of me that still wanted to be seen. But I didn't move. There's something sacred, I think, about not going back. Not once. Not even for the pie. That was the third twist. The one I didn't see coming. That I didn't want to be rescued. I didn't even want to be right. I just didn't want to disappear quietly again. And so I let the silence stretch. Let it wrap around me like a threadbare blanket. Thin, but mine. The hum of the heater filled the car once I turned the key. It clicked 3 times before blowing warm. Each sound grounded me more than anything anyone had said all night. I backed out slowly. The gravel crunched under the tires, sharp and final. As I turned onto the narrow road back to the highway, I didn't check the rearview mirror. Not because I forgot, but because I didn't need to look. They wouldn't be standing there. No one was coming after me. And in a strange, quiet way, that truth let me breathe deeper than I had in weeks. I didn't go home right away. Home felt too final, too clean. Instead, I drove without thinking, not toward anything, but away from the lodge, past shuttered gas stations, past blinking traffic lights in half-asleep neighborhoods, until I found a diner that looked closed, then realized it wasn't. One of those all-night places that smells like syrup and old coffee grounds, and something sweet that's just burned enough. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going in. Not to eat. Just to be somewhere that wasn't filled with people who didn't notice I'd left. The waitress didn't ask questions. She pointed toward the back. I nodded. The bathroom door creaked when I pushed it open. The light inside was fluorescent, too bright. The kind of light that doesn't forgive you. It shows everything. The lines under your eyes, the crease in your shirt, the smudge you didn't notice on your cheek. I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I meant to. Long enough for the silence to change shape. And then, slowly, I looked at myself. Not a glance. Not the kind of check you do before leaving the house. Not a search for mascara smudges or spinach in your teeth. This was different. This was something else. I looked and waited. And the longer I stared, the more I didn't recognize what I saw. There was my face, sure. Same dark circles. Same pale skin that flushed too easily. Same jawline I inherited from my mother, though hers always looked stronger somehow. But the person in the mirror felt unfinished. Not in the way of youth or beauty, in the way of absence, like something essential had been peeled away. And I felt it. Right then, standing in a bathroom with pink-tiled walls and a soap dispenser that squeaked when I pressed it. That word. Loser. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. It hung there, between the light and the silence and my reflection. And I started asking questions I didn't know I'd buried. Had he always thought that? Had he said it to others? Had he ever been proud of me and just forgot how to show it? Or had I been fooling myself this whole time, holding out hope where there was only absence? There was a moment, just a flicker, where I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like something I should have seen coming. This wasn't new. It wasn't even a surprise. It was just a confirmation. Like when a light bulb finally burns out and you realize it had been flickering for years. I leaned closer to the mirror, touched the side of my neck, watched my fingers move like they belonged to someone else. And that's when I remembered it. A memory I hadn't thought about in maybe 15 years. Buried under small moments. Almost forgotten. It was second grade, career day. Everyone came dressed as what they wanted to be. Doctors, astronauts. A kid with a cardboard guitar called himself a rock star. I brought a stack of drawings, pages and pages of little books I'd made. Stories about frogs who lived in trees, birds who ran bookstores. Nothing amazing, just paper and glue and wide-eyed belief. I stood in front of the class and said I wanted to be a storyteller. That's what I called it. Not a writer, not an artist. Just a storyteller. I remember the feeling, the strange kind of joy that comes when you say something out loud and believe it. After school, I handed the folder of drawings to my dad, held it out like it meant something, like it was a gift. He looked at the pages, then said, "That's cute, but you know you can't make a living from that, right?" He said it like a fact, not mean, not even critical, just casual, like it didn't matter. And maybe that's what hurt more than anything, not the disapproval, but the indifference. I don't remember what I said in response. Maybe nothing, maybe okay, but I do remember what I did next. I stopped bringing him things, little by little, over years. Until one day, there was nothing left to hand him. And now, standing in this bathroom decades later, I felt the echo of that same quiet shrink. Not because I believed him anymore, but because some part of me still waited for him to change his mind. I blinked hard, leaned on the sink. The porcelain felt cold, even under the heat of my palms. That word again, loser, and just beneath it, the one that hadn't been said, but had lived inside me anyway, unwanted. Not for who I am, but for who I've always been. I rinsed my hands slowly, watched the water spiral down. The mirror fogged a little from the change in temperature. For a moment, my reflection blurred. And that, somehow, felt better, because in that softened glass, I could almost see her again. The girl with frog stories and glue-stuck fingers and dreams she didn't yet know how to bury. And for the first time that night, I missed her. Not the version I tried to become, not the one I molded to fit silence and stay small, but her. The real one. The one who still lived somewhere beneath the shame. Waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Not fully. I laid in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin like they might protect me from thoughts I already knew too well. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my phone screen, and that glow felt like a door. I didn't open it at first, just watched it pulse. Notifications I didn't want. Nothing from him. Of course. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone from the reunion would say something, a cousin, an aunt, even my sister. But silence is fast when people are afraid of discomfort. And then there I was. Phone in hand, blank screen, text app open. His name at the top. Not Dad. Just his name. The one that started to feel more like a title I didn't earn. My thumbs hovered, and slowly the words began to come. Not rushed, not rehearsed. They came like something long buried, something that had waited too many years for a voice. I heard what you said, and I want you to know I did too. Every word. You didn't say my name, but you didn't need to. I've lived my whole life in the silence between your praise and your disappointment, and I've made a home in the space where your love should have been. I paused. The words looked harsh, typed out like that. Like a version of me I only meet when the world is too quiet. I deleted the last sentence, started again. I'm not writing to fight, I just need to say something. Because what you said, what everyone heard, won't leave me. I've spent years wondering what I did wrong, why I didn't measure up, why I was always the exception in our family's story of success. Maybe I didn't get the degrees you wanted, or the job titles, or the marriage, or the children. Maybe I lived too quietly, or too differently, or too far outside the things you believe count. But I kept going. Because once the words started, I couldn't let them die. I've created things. I've helped people. I've survived in ways no one saw. And that has to count for something. Even if it doesn't count to you. I don't need your approval. I just needed to say, I saw what you did. And I won't pretend it didn't happen. That was the sentence that caught me. The one I reread 3 times. The one I didn't delete. I sat with it, phone still in hand, body curled into the shape of someone trying not to feel too much. And I thought about sending it. Just pressing the button. Just once. Letting the truth fall where it may. But then something happened I didn't expect. I imagined his response. Not the ideal one, not the movie version, the real one. Dismissive, minimizing, or worse, no reply at all. I imagined him reading it with a shrug, or laughing, or saying, "You're being sensitive again." And something inside me wilted. Because I realized I wasn't writing for him. Not really. I was writing for me. To hear myself, to unghost my own voice. And the moment I knew that, truly knew it, I didn't need to send it anymore. The truth had already landed. Not in his inbox, but in me. And maybe that's where it always needed to land first. Still, I kept the draft. Didn't delete it, didn't send it, just left it there. A quiet document of everything I couldn't carry silently anymore. I turned the screen off, set the phone on my nightstand. The room went dark again, And for the first time in hours, I let myself exhale all the way. A long, soft release. No victory, no peace, just space. And in that space, a sentence began to rise in me. Not one I would send, not one I would even say out loud, but one I could claim. I deserved better than that. That one stayed. Not in the draft, not in the phone, but in me. Some days pass like wind. You feel them, but they don't leave a mark. But this one stayed. The day after the reunion. It lingered like fog around the base of my ribs. Not painful, just heavy. Just there. I didn't open the blinds. I didn't shower. I didn't eat until the light started fading again, and I realized I hadn't heard my own voice all day. The silence didn't scare me, but it did start to feel too big. I sat at my desk. Not because I had work to do, but because it was the only space in the apartment that didn't carry anything else. No memory, no expectation. Just me and the screen. And without really planning to, I opened an old design file. A journaling page I'd started months ago and never finished. A soft blue layout, simple border, a title at the top. Things I'm still learning to forgive. I stared at it, tried to remember what I'd meant to write underneath. I clicked into the blank space, typed one sentence, that I needed their permission to feel proud of myself. Then I hit save. That's it. That was the start. It wasn't some bold reclaiming. It wasn't defiant. It was quiet, careful, but real. I made tea, lit a candle that smelled like cardamom and vanilla, and for the first time in days, I breathed all the way in. The next day, I opened that file again, made a second page. This one was called When I Felt Invisible and What It Taught Me. No answers, just space, just room for softness. I kept going. One page became 3, then 5. Not because I thought they were brilliant, but because each one felt like a place I could place a little weight, just enough to stop carrying it all. It felt like building a small home inside myself. One morning, without much thinking, I uploaded the set to my Etsy shop, the one I hadn't touched in over a year. I didn't post about it, didn't announce anything, just hit publish and close the tab. It wasn't for success. It wasn't to prove anything. I just wanted someone, maybe a stranger, to sit with those same words, to feel a little less alone in them. A week passed. Then I got a notification, one download, a name I didn't recognize. They'd bought the full set. No message, no review, just a quiet transaction between two people who didn't know each other, but maybe knew something of the same ache. And something about that broke me open, gently. Because it wasn't about money, it wasn't about being seen. It was about resonance, about being useful in a way that wasn't performative. I remembered a phrase I'd heard once. Service is what you do when your healing overflows. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But maybe I was finding places to let the ache pour out into something softer. The pages kept coming. I made one called When I Let Go of Earning Their Love. Another, What I Would Say If They Finally Asked. Each one built slowly, no rush, just a rhythm. It gave my hands something to do, and my mind something to hold besides the weight of that sentence. The one he said. The one no one challenged. Some nights I still thought about the reunion. The way the light flickered above the table. The sound of my chair scraping back. The plate left full. But other nights, I thought about color palettes. Fonts that felt gentle. Margins wide enough to breathe. I thought about the people who might open these pages at their own kitchen tables, with their own bruises, their own words unsent, their own mirrors avoided. And I thought, maybe this is what I do now. Maybe this is where I begin again. Not as someone they'd approve of, not as someone to win back anything, but as the person I've always been beneath their silence. The storyteller, the one who sees shapes in sentences, who builds safety out of blank pages and permission to feel. It wasn't a big thing, no ceremony, no reinvention, just the slow return of my own voice. Soft, steady, and finally, mine. It happened slowly, not in a wave, not in a rush, but in small, quiet notifications. The first one caught me off guard. An order. Then another. Then someone left a note attached. It just said, "Thank you for this." I used the Invisible Moments page with my therapist. It helped me say something I couldn't find words for before. I read it twice, 3 times. It was a single line, but it pressed into something I didn't know I needed touched. Not validation exactly, but recognition. That something I made, quietly, from a place of pain I hadn't even fully named, was useful. Not performative, not polished, just useful. I let the message sit in my inbox for 2 days before I responded. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust my voice not to shake, even in writing. When I did write back, I kept it simple. I thanked her, said I was glad the page had met her where she was. She replied again, told me she'd shared it with 2 friends, said she hoped I'd keep making more. And I did. Not out of obligation, but because, somehow, her words had handed me a little more space inside myself. I created a set called The Words I Swallowed, another called The Love I Needed Then. They weren't complex, just prompts. Questions I wish someone had asked me when I was still trying to earn love by shrinking. The messages kept coming, soft, careful ones. I didn't know how to start healing until this gave me a place to begin. I printed the permission to let go page and cried over it for an hour. My daughter and I filled these out together. She's 13. I think you gave us a way to talk. Each time, I thought about deleting the emails after reading them. Not because I didn't want them, but because they made me feel something too big. Something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. Impact. The kind that didn't demand perfection. The kind that came quietly and stayed. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from a woman named Sharon. She said she'd found my shop through a friend. Said she used the pages in her trauma recovery group. Said my writing felt like someone had walked through it first. She asked if I'd ever thought about becoming a coach. Said the way I framed things, the way I asked questions, felt therapeutic. I didn't know what to say, because the truth was, I hadn't. Not really. Not in a way that felt allowed. That word, coach, felt too big, too official, too much like something my family would laugh at over dinner and say, "Oh, you're doing that now." But it stayed with me. That question. Had I ever thought about it? Yes. In quiet moments. In journal entries I didn't share. But I always buried it beneath doubt. Beneath the echo of his voice. You can't make a living from that. Still, something in Sharon's words cracked through. Because she wasn't asking for a title. She was naming something she already saw. And for the first time, I let myself look at it without flinching. I started searching. Not aggressively, not obsessively. Just at night, in bed, phone screen dimmed, typing soft phrases like, how to guide others through healing writing, how to hold space for people who've been silenced, how to become a trauma-informed journaling coach. And it didn't feel like ambition, it felt like remembering. Remembering who I might have been if I'd been allowed to follow that thread all the way through. If someone had said, yes, that matters too. The irony wasn't lost on me. That the same voice that had once been dismissed, by him, by silence, by doubt, was now the reason someone else felt less alone. There was no ceremony, no now I am healed moment, just a shift, a quiet knowing that what I offered, in my own way, in my own voice, was enough. Sometimes I still open the old messages, let them breathe for a moment, not to prove anything, but to remember that people I've never met, who owe me nothing, have said things my own family never did. I see you. I hear this. Please keep going. And I will. Maybe not loudly, maybe not fast, but in the way I always have. Slow, honest, and full of breath. It came on a Thursday, just an email. No subject line, just, hi all, Mom's birthday this weekend. Hope you can make it. 2 p.m. He signed it with his name. Not Dad, not love you, just his name. I stared at it for a long time. The screen didn't flicker. The words didn't change. They just sat there, nothing beneath them, not a follow-up, not a "how are you?" Not even a mention of the last time we'd all been in the same room. Not the sentence he said, not the chair I pulled in for myself, not the plate I left full. And I realized he wasn't going to say anything. Not now. Not ever. Not even the vague, halfway kind of apology people give when they want the discomfort to go away. Not even the, I didn't mean it that way. Nothing. And I waited. Longer than I meant to. I told myself I was just busy, that I'd reply when I had more energy. But really, I was watching myself. I wanted to know if that silence, his silence, still had the power to make me small. It didn't. It stung, yes, but it didn't shrink me. Not this time. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I sat down at my desk, opened my journal, and wrote, "He'll never say it, and I don't need him to." That was the moment. The one I didn't see coming. Because for so long, I thought healing would look like a conversation, a reckoning, a day where he sat across from me and said, "I'm sorry I didn't see you. I'm sorry I didn't know how to love the version of you that didn't fit." But that day was never going to come. And oddly, knowing that didn't break me. It steadied me. Because the waiting, the endless holding of space for someone else's growth, that's what was keeping me stuck. And I was tired of waiting in the doorway of a house I no longer lived in. That afternoon, I went for a walk. The air was cold, late winter, the kind that feels clean, even when it cuts. I passed a coffee shop I used to go to, back when I still lived in, back when I thought every unanswered message was just an oversight, and every silence was just someone too busy to see me. Inside the window, I saw a girl sitting alone with a notebook. She was writing slowly, her hand resting at the top of the page between each sentence. And I thought, there I am. Not literally, but something in the shape of her. The careful presence. The stillness that says, this matters, even if no one else is watching. I kept walking. When I got home, the apartment was quiet, but it didn't feel lonely. I made tea, lit a candle, opened my inbox. There was a message from a woman named Lee. She said she'd found my journaling set through a recommendation, said she cried through the page titled, "What I Wanted from You That You Couldn't Give." She didn't say who the you was. She didn't need to. I wrote back, "I understand. Some things go unsaid, not because they don't matter, but because the person we needed to say them didn't know how." She replied with a heart. That was all. And it was enough. Later that night, I thought again about the email from my father, the invitation, the nothingness around it. And I realized something I'd never admitted to myself. I used to think love had to be earned, that if I worked hard enough, got quiet enough, became useful enough, I'd be pulled back into the fold. But love doesn't live in earning. It lives in presence, in the words we choose, and in the ones we withhold. He chose. And so did I. I didn't go to the birthday. I didn't send a card. I didn't explain myself. And for the first time, that didn't feel like absence. It felt like choice, like agency, like placing a boundary not to punish someone, but to protect the version of me I'm still learning to care for. The girl who brought frog stories to career day. The woman who designs spaces for silence to speak. She doesn't need to hear it anymore. Because she already knows. She was never the loser. I have a chair now. It's not fancy. Just a wooden one I found at a local thrift store. Worn at the edges, slightly uneven at first. I sanded it down, painted it a soft gray, put new felt pads on the feet so it wouldn't scrape the floor every time I moved. It sits in front of my window, the one that gets the best afternoon light, right beside my desk, within reach of a small bookshelf and a ceramic cup filled with pens that still work. I didn't buy it to match anything. I bought it because it felt solid, like it had held weight before, and wasn't afraid to hold mine now. That matters to me more than I used to admit. I sit in it every morning now, before I check emails, before the day starts moving. Sometimes I write, sometimes I just breathe, sometimes I do nothing at all. And that, too, is something I had to learn. That doing nothing is not the same as having nothing to give. It took me years to get here, to build a room where I belonged without negotiation, to stop asking if I deserved to sit at the table, to pull in my own chair and know, in my body, that it was enough. I think about that family reunion sometimes, not often, but in flashes. The light above the table, the sentence, the plate I left full. I used to replay that scene in my mind like it held an answer I missed, but now I see it for what it was. A moment that told the truth, loudly, finally, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That was the gift, strangely. Not the hurt, though that was real, but the clarity. And clarity, I've learned, is a quiet kind of freedom. Last week, my niece, the youngest one, messaged me. It was late, past midnight. Her name popped up unexpectedly. I opened the message, already bracing for something I didn't know how to hold, but all it said was, "I saw what happened that day. You didn't deserve that, just wanted you to know." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "Thank you. That means more than you know." She didn't say anything after that. Didn't need to. It was enough. Not because it made anything okay, but because it was real, and kind, and unscripted. And in a family where silence is the native language, that's more than most ever get. I printed out the message, folded it neatly, tucked it into the back of my journal, not to cling to, but to remember that even the smallest witnesses matter, especially when they choose to speak. I think often about all the spaces we try to squeeze ourselves into, how we contort, perform, shrink, just to be invited. But what no one tells you is that sometimes the invitation never comes, and it's not a reflection of your worth. It's just a door that was never built for you. So you build your own. I did. It started with pages no one read, then messages from strangers, then a rhythm that felt like breath, and now, this chair. Mine. Not given, not granted, just chosen. By me. And that matters. In a world that taught me to wait for permission, choosing myself feels like revolution. Small, soft, but steady. So I sit here, most mornings, sometimes with tea, sometimes with silence, sometimes with grief that still shows up, even when it knows it won't be fed. And I say, without saying, I am proud of who I've become. Even if he never was, even if he never will be, because healing didn't arrive through his apology. It arrived through my voice, through what I made, through the stillness I stopped running from, and through this chair, the one I pulled in for myself when no one else thought to save me a seat. Maybe your name was never said out loud. Maybe your chair was never pulled out for you. But you're here now. And that means something. Sometimes healing doesn't sound like forgiveness. Sometimes it just sounds like your own breath. Steady, uninterrupted, yours. If this story touched something quiet in you, you can leave a word below. Not to explain, just to be seen. I'll be here, reading like a whisper,